Hi guys, it's Bunny and welcome to today's video and welcome to another WWE reaction. This video was recommended by Dark Tempest and he said, Bunny, you gotta react to the Nexus story. We are one. It's really good. I did find the video by Wrestle with Andy and he does amazing documentaries, and this is another thing that I can still keep learning and keep educating myself about WWE because I almost know nothing about the history of WWE. I am keeping track with the latest stuff, but I'm still trying to track myself back into the older stuff so I can understand some of the wrestlers who are literally legends today and still mentioned even to this day. So let's go and react to this video, shall we?
Invading Force has been a storyline that's been used again and again throughout wrestling history. Whether it's the UWF's invasion on New Japan in the 80s, the NWO's invasion of WCW in the 90s, or the Alliance's invasion of WWE in the 2000s.
This one I learned about.
The idea has always felt exciting during its initial sparks, even if it's been met with varying degrees of success as it's gone on. No, on this occasion, the threat was coming from within. So, how did it all play out? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into the entire storyline from start to finish in We Are One, the Nexus story.
Yeah.
Before we start getting into the angle itself, let's look at the backstory. Yes, while most wrestling fans are aware of NXT for its recent super indie and current developmental incarnations, it wasn't always this way. No, in its earliest form, when the idea was still germinating, it took the shape of a game show,
one
which would see its contenders have to go through a number of comedic tasks, such as carrying barrels or running obstacle courses, rather than prove their skills in the ring so as to get a job.
I don't really think that you can eliminate one thing there. Wrestling should be the main thing. But also, in my opinion, adding these games and stuff would be fun, but also ending it with an actual wrestling match.
And while for some fans of Vince McMahon's sports entertainment style this was enjoyable, for most it was seen as pretty stupid and not exactly the best way of developing new talents, especially given that amongst these were prominent indie stars like Stu Bennett and Bryan Danielson. But regardless of this, the boss had his plans and he stuck to them, renaming these performers as Wade Barrett and Daniel Bryan thereafter, and putting them through the NXT boot camp alongside other hot prospects like Heath Slater, Skip Sheffield, and Darren Young. And so with this decision then, a lot of hardcore fans lost hope that anything interesting would come out of the situation, especially since this was 2010 WWE, one of the darkest periods in the company's history both creatively and in-ring speaking. How pleasantly surprised they would turn out to be, however, when, only a week after Wade Barrett had been announced as the winner of the show on June 1st of that year, the very fabric of the main roster would be torn to pieces when on Raw, after a main event which saw John Cena and CM Punk battle it out, each of the NXT contestants invaded the ringside area, from there laying waste to the two competitors, all before they would go on to destroy everything else in their sight. Yes, on that night, as Barrett himself called the shots, the new unit, initially made up of Bryan, Sheffield, Slater, Darren Young, Justin Gabriel, David Otunga, and Michael Tarver, would trash whatever they saw as theirs, taking out the commentary team and then annihilating the ringside crew. All this before tearing the ring up too, as an eerie soundtrack of silence played out over the top of everything.
Silence?
And of course, everyone watching knew that it was part of the show, but given how cookie-cutter most of WWE was at that point, the event managed to feel real enough so that people could suspend their disbelief and watch in awe as this invading force left Raw a mess of broken superstars and ringside materials come the end. With the
it's a cool start. It's a cool beginning to a fraction or a revolution or something.
Image of the night ultimately being of EMTs taking John Cena out of the arena on a stretcher.
Poor guy. But he didn't deserve that.
So instantly then, this group became the hottest angle in the industry, as, with such a stellar first impression, this new group was able to draw parallels to the likes of the NWO as wrestling fans, starved for something exciting, became engrossed, and waited patiently to see where all this would go next. Sadly though, things would hit an early bump in the road when, just 4 days later, Daniel Bryan would be released from his contract, with the reason for this being that in the heat of the attack he had choked out ring announcer Justin Roberts with his own necktie, something that was deemed too violent for the PG product McMahon was putting out at this time. And sure, well, this did slightly damage the idea of the rookies being an unstoppable invading force, as well as hurt things in the sense that
you are not unstoppable if Vince McMahon can just fire you, you know, and get rid of you. Like, if he doesn't like that, he just can say, bye-bye, see you later.
The best wrestler of all of them was now gone, most fans were willing to let this slide as they still saw all the potential that lay ahead with the angle. So when the stable of newcomers returned to Raw the next week on June 14th to explain their actions, everyone was listening. And that they were there to inject some fresh blood into the company and rid it of all the stars of old in the process.
Reminds me of Crash
and over
Bandicoot.
the coming weeks, they would set about doing just this, showing up to Raw each Monday to attack both active wrestlers and legends in equal measure, with there being no discrimination to their beatdowns as they took out the likes of Ricky Steamboat, Dusty Rhodes, Bret Hart, and Vince McMahon himself at one point. And with no one willing to take the position after this then for fear of receiving a beating themselves, the boss was forced to install an anonymous GM, one whose true identity would remain a secret, thus keeping him safe from harm. Of course, the story of the anonymous general manager is one for another day, and for the purposes of this angle, it just meant that the Nexus would have to focus their attacks elsewhere instead, with them next going after the company's top star, John Cena, once more. This leading to a formal feud between the two parties, as the face of WWE was scheduled to take on all 7 members of the heel group in a handicap match on the July 12th episode of Raw. That might achieve their goal of taking over WWE from there. And continuing on this goal, after that, the rookies would go one further by trying to disrupt the WWE World Title match at July 18th's Money in the Bank pay-per-view, there managing to stop Sheamus and Cena from giving fans all they had. So by this point, it had become clear to everyone in the WWE locker room something had to be done about the Nexus, and something had to be done soon before they got too big to stop. This was how, at SummerSlam on August 15th, a union of WWE superstars would come together to take on the Outsiders in a 7-on-7 elimination match, with Barrett, Sheffield, Young, Gabriel, Slater, Otunga, and Tarver standing on one side of the ring, while on the other stood Cena, Bret Hart, Edge, Chris Jericho, John Morrison, R-Truth, and much to the surprise of everyone watching, Daniel Bryan. Yes, after the heat of the necktie incident had died down and WWE had realized the error of their ways, they brought back Bryan as a surprise entrant for the match, with him now acting as a babyface who understood that the Nexus were going about things the wrong way and needed to be stopped at all costs. But of course, given this was one of the biggest shows of the year and the heels were still the hottest thing in the company with plenty of juice left in their act, you'd have expected the night to end with them going over and continuing their reign of dominance from there. Sadly though, that's not what would happen, as instead, Big Match John would overcome the odds and defeat the Nexus by the end, with this pretty much killing their momentum stone dead in the process.
Destroyed!
And as if that wasn't bad enough, it would later be revealed by none other than Edge that the original plan was indeed for the heels to win that night, with Barrett to be portrayed as a particularly dominating force come the close of the match. Ultimately, though, it looks like Cena was able to use his backstage sway to veto this idea, with him believing that he should get the big babyface win instead, something he's since admitted he was wrong about. But that realization would sadly come too late because by then, the damage had already been done, with the Nexus now feeling less like the unstoppable force they had been, and more like just another villain of the week for Super Cena to overcome. So trying their best to salvage things then. The next night on Raw, the group would begin the process of weeding out their weak links, with this eventually seeing Darren Young get the boot by the end of the night after he lost a match to Cena. Still, that wouldn't do much to turn their fortunes around as it happened, because just 2 days later at a live event in Hawaii, Skip Sheffield would break his ankle, with this being bad enough that it would put him out of action for the next 2 years.
Poor guy.
And from there, Wade Barrett, who many saw as the breakout star in waiting of the group, would fail to win the WWE title during a 6-pack elimination match at Night of Champions, with this only further cementing him as a loser in the fans' eyes.
Oh no!
But what made this decision in particular even more baffling was that, allegedly around this time, WWE were making plans to have the Englishman challenge The Undertaker at WrestleMania 27, with him even being rumored to be the one to finally end the streak at various stages in the process.
Easy
of
way
course,
out!
That would never happen though, because come WrestleMania 27, the Nexus, and Barrett as a consequence, would be well and truly placed below Taker's level. Still, at the time, many still held out hope that they could be salvaged, with the next step in this rehabilitation coming at October 3rd's Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, where Barrett and Cena would face off one-on-one under the stipulation that, if Big Match John lost, he would be forced to join the Nexus. And that night, with the help of the 2 newest members of the group, Husky Harris and Michael McGillicuddy, Barrett would indeed get the win, this forcing the face of the company to reluctantly join the heel stable, with him even going as far as to eliminate himself from a #1 contendership battle royal the next night on Raw so as to allow the group's leader to pick up the win instead. All while later in the same night, he would have no choice but to help Wade Barrett pick up a DQ win over WWE Champion Randy Orton. And with this win in his pocket then, the Englishman would earn himself a shot at the title itself, something he would end up cashing in on at the following month's Survivor Series, a match that would actually see Cena be appointed the special guest referee and be given the stipulation that if he did not help his leader win the title, then he would be fired as a result. Before we would get there, though, dissension would begin to boil up within the ranks of the Nexus, as only weeks after Michael Tarver had been booted from the group with his stablemates by then no longer believing he had what it took, David Otunga would begin to question the leadership of Barrett, something which led to Otunga having to fight to keep
This is the worst. This is like when you start to question authority and their cracks start speaking from within. That's when like things can go really badly.
Position within the group as well, something he successfully did on the November 12th episode of SmackDown after defeating Edge. Still, even with his spot in the stable secure, it was clear by now that there were major cracks forming, and that, if this wasn't taken care of soon, there would soon be real problems for the invading force. And these mounting problems would only get worse when, at the Survivor Series on November 21st, John Cena would fail to help Barrett defeat Randy Orton. This meaning that not only was the Nexus without the WWE title, but Big Match John would be fired as a result. Of course, no one watching actually bought for a second that the company's top star would lose his job, but the least WWE could have done to sell the story would have been to take him off TV for at least a week. Not wanting to risk any viewers tuning out though, they were unwilling to do even this, and so, despite now being kayfabe gone from the company, Cena would make a mockery of the stipulation by showing up the next night on Raw to cost Barrett his rematch against Orton. From there, continuing to appear every week after that so as to further interfere in Nexus matches, with him later announcing that he would only stop if the Nexus chose to allow him to be reinstated in the company. And having to decide what to do next then, a full-blown civil war broke out amongst the group as, desperate to stop the attacks, David Otunga issued an ultimatum to Barrett on the December 6th episode of Raw, stating that if he did not reinstate Cena, then he would be exiled from the stable. And seeing this threat to his leadership then, the Englishman would cave and bring Big Match John back the following week, only on the conditions, however, that he face him one-on-one at December 19th's Tables, Ladders, and Chairs pay-per-view. So this was it then, the last opportunity for the Nexus to be rehabbed as a credible threat as, with a singles win over the face of the company, Barrett would finally be able to rise up to the next level and hopefully carry the rest of his friends along with him. As anyone who was watching at that time will already know, however, that's not what happened. As instead, the night ended with Cena quite literally burying his opponent as he would beat him soundly then, after dispatching the rest of the group with ease, would drop 23 steel chairs on top of the Englishman at the top of the entrance ramp, leaving him engulfed and gone from sight. And after that then, the Nexus were officially dead, so much so that they would have to undergo somewhat of a rebranding in the following months. Yes, it was on the January 3rd, 2011 episode of Raw, after weeks of teasing that they were going to be under new management, that the new Nexus would reveal their leader in the form of CM Punk, someone who would be taking over from Barrett's role after he'd repeatedly failed to get the job done. Yes, Barrett had been formally exiled from the stable, and now Punk, who had nothing to do with them prior to this, was in the top position, something which made little sense at the time. And not every member of the new Nexus was happy with the straight-edge superstar's leadership as it happened, as, after refusing to follow his orders, Justin Gabriel and Heath Slater would leave the group soon thereafter, with them from there going on to realign themselves with Barrett as the trio formed the now having realized that they didn't need a single voice, the group worked together without a single leader, claiming that each member now had as much say as the others. Back over on Raw, though, and CM Punk remained the very clear leader of the new Nexus as he led Husky Harris, Michael McGillicuddy, and David Otunga like a war general, using them as his troops to be deployed at his will, while also adding another new member in the form of Mason Ryan. And while the idea of an eventual war between the two stables seemed like an obvious one to do, it would never really get off the ground, as both were now on different brands. That said, At the 2011 Royal Rumble on January 30th, both groups did find themselves in the same building once again.
Okay.
This leading to much opportunity for the two sides to brawl. All well, elsewhere, the new Nexus would be simultaneously starting a program with Randy Orton after costing him a WWE title match against The Miz. But given their much reduced status as legitimate heel threats by this point, Orton would have no trouble taking out his new rivals one by one on the weeks
Easy
that followed,
mode.
going through each new Nexus member on the subsequent episodes of Raw,
RKO.
all before finally beating CM Punk himself at WrestleMania 27 and dispatching him too. And while this was going on, back over on SmackDown, the Core would find success, with two of their members, Gabriel and Slater, becoming WWE Tag Team Champions around this time after defeating Santino Marella and Vladimir Kozlov. And to make matters even better, soon after this, Barrett would finally win some gold himself when he beat Kofi Kingston to become the Intercontinental Champion, a far cry from the WrestleMania program with The Undertaker that had originally been discussed for him around this time, but a step in the right direction nonetheless.
Yeah.
That said, after that, things would start to fall apart for the Core, as after being soundly beaten at WrestleMania in under 2 minutes by the team of The Big Show, Kane, Kofi Kingston, and Santino Marella, the group hoped to rebound by taking out John Cena and The Rock the next night on Raw. Sadly, though, they would not be able to overcome the duo and would instead get sent packing,
Bring John
with this
Cena to
crippling
end
their
it.
legitimacy all over again,
As
they were made to
always.
look like inferior jobbers. And these woes would only be added to when soon thereafter, on the April 22nd episode of SmackDown, Gabriel and Slater would lose their tag team titles to The Big Show and Kane, with this eventually leading to Ezekiel Jackson beginning to distance himself from the group, something which would later cause the other members to turn on him as a feud began between Jackson and Barrett over the Intercontinental title going into the summer. In the end, though, the final nail in the coffin of the Core would come on the June 10th episode of the Blue Brand, at which point Barrett, fleeing a potential attack from Jackson, would walk out on Gabriel and Slater during a 6-man tag match, leaving them to the Wolves in the process and causing them to get beat soundly. After this, then, they would confront their former leader backstage and declare that if he wasn't going to be there for them, then this was the end of the road for the stable, something which ended up being the case, as after that night, the Core would be no more.
There's no Nexus,
Back
no
over
Core?
on Raw, however, and the new Nexus were finding renewed success after two of their members, Michael McGillicuddy and David Otunga, had managed to beat The Big Show and Kane for the WWE Tag Team titles, the very titles they'd won from the Core themselves. And following this, CM Punk would start his journey towards becoming WWE Champion when, on the June 20th edition of Raw, he became #1 contender for John Cena's prize, with this being the night that he would famously reveal his contract was set to expire on the very evening of that match at the upcoming Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Knowing now what was coming next, however, it's clear that this would represent the end of the new Nexus too, because by next week's episode of the Red Brand, they would sink into complete irrelevancy after Punk cut his now iconic pipe bomb promo. This making him the hottest thing in the wrestling industry and causing him to outgrow the stable over the course of one segment. Yes, while he would never officially leave the group on screen, Punk would make no further references to his allegiances with the new Nexus after this, with the whole thing just sort of being brushed under the rug as the company realized they had something far more exciting going on with him now.
True.
And as for the remaining members, well, their fates wouldn't go much better, as Mason Ryan would get taken out with an injury. All well elsewhere, Husky Harris and Michael McGillicuddy continued to limp on as a tag team for a while, eventually separating themselves a month later. Yes, it was a limp end to what had started off as one of the best storylines in years for WWE. But by that point, there was really no saving it anymore as, while it may have been exciting on that first night, by the time it got to SummerSlam in 2010 and the group were thoroughly jobbed out to Super Cena, the whole thing was done. Could things have been done differently to make it all work? Of course they could, but as we would find out come the end of CM Punk's Summer of Punk later in 2011, long-term storytelling wasn't WWE's strong point by this time. So
now
maybe
it is,
was
though.
always destined to fail then. And with this in mind, perhaps the best thing to be taken from it all is that it did introduce fans to some new performers, many of whom would go on to become stars in their own right as time went on. Yes, of course, everyone already knows the career trajectory of Daniel Bryan following the Nexus, but on top of that, Husky Harris would later morph into Bray Wyatt and become a main eventer himself, All while elsewhere, Skip Sheffield would find greater success as Ryback.
Oh, yeah.
Heath Slater would carve out a nice role for himself as WWE's greatest jobber since the Brooklyn Brawler,
Greatest
and even
what?
Wade Barrett
Jobber?
would recover somewhat with his excellent Bad News Barrett gimmick a few years later, albeit still falling far from the main eventer he should have been.
Yeah.
So while the Nexus may never have reached the levels of success that many had initially hoped for it, we just can't call it a complete failure. Because without it, many of these performers might never have got the chance to shine on such a grand stage at all. This prime
You end the video like that? Oh my god, I'm mad. Not even goodbye. Just cut it there, ship it. Wow. I just felt like I have been slapped like Cody X3 all over again. Hi. Let's see what the comments are saying. The Nexus had the potential to become one of the greatest factions in history. Poor booking overshadowed that potential, and their feud with Cena didn't help them either. I wish they didn't choose Cena. I really wish they didn't choose Cena as their opponent. Definitely one of the biggest missed opportunities in wrestling. Oh no. Oy, oy, oy. The Nexus may have failed, but what came from the ashes was something beautiful. I say the first season of NXT was a resounding success. I think if the Nexus hadn't failed so miserably, we wouldn't have gotten the success that was the Shield. Oh, really? See, like, things are always connected in a way. Like, yeah, some things that had potential might not succeed, and there is a reason for that. It happens for a reason. But then, because of that, like, it's like this butterfly effect. Like, it literally continues, and something else comes out that would not have if this thing did not fail. You know? Like relationships. One relationship doesn't work out, and, like, it's failure, but then you succeed in another where, like, hey, yo, maybe if that one didn't fail, I wouldn't have learned that I wouldn't have a better relationship today, you know? Things like that. But that is it, guys, for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. Have a wonderful day, and look at me saying goodbye properly to my viewers. Andy, yeah, wish us a good day and say bye-bye. All right, guys, have a wonderful day and see you next time.